You are listening to Cranky Dan, a no-holds-barred column where Dan delivers sharp, witty rants on pop culture, politics, tech, and everyday cultural absurdities with unapologetic candor. Episode 2. Buffering at 42,000 feet. My slow descent into Wi-Fi madness. Stranded in the sky. Wrestling with the ultimate modern inconvenience. Slow, in-flight Wi-Fi. What begins as a minor digital frustration spirals into an existential crisis at 570 miles per hour. Released on crankydan.com on September 26th. Chapter 1. The Pre-Meltdown Calm. There is a particular serenity in knowing you are flying through the stratosphere in a metal tube, propelled by fiery engines, traveling faster than sound, and yet still feeling indignant that your Wi-Fi connection is unstable. I boarded this flight, seat 11A if you must know, ready to maintain my digital footprint. I had preloaded 2 Kindle books, planned to finally binge-watch Castle Rock, and preemptively downloaded 3 podcasts, as backup naturally. I even skimmed the Inflight magazine, a literary masterpiece, offering the latest update on duty-free perfumes. I knew that the in-flight Wi-Fi was advertised as high speed. As a seasoned traveler, I didn't expect NASA-level bandwidth, but something reasonably equivalent to the Wi-Fi I enjoy in cafes that charge $7 for a turmeric latte. The stewardess's gentle reminder that streaming may be limited was a minor footnote in my otherwise technologically luxurious existence. A shrug, a smile. What did she know about my prowess with virtual private networks and throttling workarounds? I was practically a digital ninja. I reclined in my seat, awaiting the announcement that we had hit cruising altitude, and I could finally connect to the invisible, magic web that would allow me to stay in touch with my very important digital self. Oh, the dopamine rush of those first few seconds when my phone latched onto the Skylink Fast network. My icons lit up like Christmas. Emails, Instagram likes, news alerts. I was a god among mortals, hovering at 42,000 feet, with all of humanity's knowledge just a fingertip away. I was calm, confident, and connected. Chapter 2. First Signs of Trouble. The momentary thrill of connection was almost euphoric, like the first time you successfully swiped your credit card through one of those archaic parking meters, without having to call a helpline. But much like parking meters and the fickle laws of physics that govern connectivity at nearly 600 miles per hour, it didn't last. It began with a spinning wheel, a harbinger of doom I had seen before, but which I now ignored with hubris. The wheel spun lazily, mocking my attempts to open my email. No problem, I thought. Let's try Instagram instead. What harm could a few selfies and cat videos cause the delicate network floating between the firmament and space? Surely not enough to slow the mighty Skylink. Instagram, too, refused to obey. The wheel spun faster, then stopped, and then a crushing message appeared. Cannot refresh feed. My heart sank. I had 14 new DMs to respond to and a meme draft to perfect. Surely this was a temporary setback, a mere bump in the celestial highway that would smooth itself out once the plane found its true cruising altitude. I clung to the seat back in front of me, refusing to accept the horror unfolding before me. Chapter 3. The Anxiety Builds. At 42,000 feet, there are few things more tragic than realizing your in-flight Wi-Fi isn't working as advertised. Wars have been fought for less, civilizations crumbled under the weight of broken promises. Yet here I was, hurtling through the atmosphere, disconnected, and on the verge of what can only be described as an identity crisis. Denial was my first refuge. Maybe the plane was simply adjusting its satellite connection. I mean, the logistics of bouncing Wi-Fi off satellites while traveling at near supersonic speeds couldn't be that complicated, right? This was 2024. Anything less than high-speed connectivity was practically uncivilized. I refreshed my Gmail for the 8th time. Surely a world where I couldn't access my work emails while floating over the Atlantic Ocean was a world teetering on the edge of barbarism. Bargaining followed swiftly. If I could just get enough bandwidth to check my Slack notifications, I would be at peace. I didn't need to reply to every message, just a few strategic ones, to remind the world that I, too, was a cog in the grand machine of productivity. I closed every app, opened just Slack. One icon, one little ping, nothing. Panic set in. I looked around at my fellow passengers. Surely they were experiencing the same existential despair, though most appeared to be engaged in more primitive forms of in-flight entertainment. Reading hardcover books, watching in-flight movies, or simply staring into the void, their Wi-Fi icons dark. The fool next to me, seat 11B, even had the audacity to be sleeping. Was he unaware of the magnitude of what was at stake? By the time we crossed the first time zone, I had already transitioned from mild irritation to full-blown Wi-Fi mania. It wasn't just the unresponsive Slack messages, it was the principle. I mean, how had humanity gotten so far, yet fallen so short? We put a man on the moon. We invented peanut butter and jelly in one convenient jar. But here, aboard a marvel of modern aviation, I was left to twiddle my thumbs while waiting for a connection slower than dial-up. In fact, I began to wonder if I'd accidentally wandered into some retro-themed, low-bandwidth, vintage plane experience without realizing it. Did I miss the stewardess saying, "And welcome aboard Flight 972, our Heritage Edition, where we bring you the authentic 1990s flying experience, including spotty Wi-Fi, flip phones in the emergency seatbacks, and a once-a-decade view of someone turning off their Discman." The plane's gentle hum, once soothing, became an ominous drone. I could feel every fluctuation in the altitude like some kind of cursed barometer for connectivity. At 42,100 feet, maybe, just maybe, the signal would find its strength. At 42,000 feet flat, nope, you're back to staring at an endless loading screen. Oh, sure, Louis C.K. once quipped, "Could you give it a second? It's going to space." But guess what? I'm already there, in space. And no, I'm not inclined to give it another second. Every nanosecond of this cosmic journey has been meticulously choreographed, every moment accounted for, each involving, of course, my relentless tether to the digital world. Because apparently, that's what the stars really demand. For the love of Wi-Fi. The stewardess passed by with a cart of drinks, unaware that she was witnessing the unraveling of a human psyche before her very eyes. I tried to make eye contact, but it was impossible to convey with a single glance, "Excuse me, ma'am, but I am currently trapped in a dystopian nightmare where my work emails refuse to load despite being hurtled through the atmosphere at near supersonic speeds. Could I perhaps trouble you for an additional packet of peanuts as I descend into a Wi-Fi-induced existential spiral?" Instead, I asked for a Sprite. I returned my gaze to my phone, certain that, like Schrodinger's cat, Google it, my emails both existed and did not exist until I could force this cursed Wi-Fi to reveal its secrets. Perhaps, no, certainly, there were important messages I was missing. A new meme template that required my immediate reaction. A project deadline moved forward that would derail my entire week. Or worse, someone could be tagging me in unflattering Instagram photos, and I wouldn't even know it until we landed. What horrors awaited me on the other side of this bandwidth black hole? I refreshed my screen again, spinning. The wheel spun in tandem with my growing anxiety, a hypnotic reminder of my lack of control in this digital purgatory. I toggled airplane mode on and off, as if somehow I could will the connection into existence. My rational brain understood the mechanics. Flicking a switch wasn't going to magically awaken the satellites. But in moments like this, when you're trapped thousands of feet above the earth, cut off from the digital ether, irrationality takes the wheel. Surely it wasn't just me. No, I couldn't be the only one suffering in this digital wasteland. My thoughts turned dark, paranoid. Perhaps the other passengers were siphoning my bandwidth. The kid across the aisle with an iPad, could his mindless, repetitive game of Candy Crush be the reason I couldn't access my Google Docs? Was 11C hoarding all the Wi-Fi for their Spotify playlist? It wasn't out of the question. I leaned forward, trying to get a glance at their screens, but everyone was maddeningly serene. Some didn't even have devices in front of them. Luddites. Asleep? Asleep at a time like this? As if there weren't entire oceans of untapped Wi-Fi to plunder? Monsters! The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, and my frustration began to metastasize into something darker, rage. I fumed at the mere existence of turbulence itself. How dare this plane shake? Surely, with all the advancements in flight technology, they could have found a way to smooth out these bumps in the road. Why hadn't we invested more in anti-turbulence technology? Where were our priorities as a species? If they could invent a jet engine powerful enough to get me to the other side of the world in a matter of hours, surely they could spare a little extra juice for uninterrupted Wi-Fi. But no. Apparently, my discomfort and lack of connectivity were acceptable sacrifices in the pursuit of safety. As the plane shuddered again, I began to reconsider my life choices. Here I was, thousands of feet in the air, in a state of pure luxury, my seat gently reclined, my Sprite freshly poured, and yet I was on the verge of a breakdown because I couldn't access a cloud-based file. What had happened to me? How had my priorities gotten so grotesquely warped? The question didn't linger long. I needed distraction. Perhaps I could take solace in my saved media. I turned to my Kindle app. If I couldn't connect to the internet, I could at least engage in the simple pleasure of reading. But it was too late. The rot had set in. The notion of offline reading now seemed quaint, old-fashioned, like churning your own butter or starting a fire with sticks. Without the option to Google a word or fact-check a reference, what even was reading? My Kindle felt like a relic of a simpler time, when people had the patience to sit for hours without the temptation of constant digital stimulation. I resented it now, a brick of antiquated content that couldn't so much as send me a push notification. And so, I did the only thing left to do in my rapidly crumbling state of mind. I opened the in-flight entertainment system. I had reached a new low. I had become one of them. The screen was, of course, comically tiny, like a relic of the early aughts, when airlines apparently believed we wanted to watch blockbuster films on screens smaller than a cereal box. I fumbled through the options, already bracing myself for disappointment. But what fresh indignity was this? The airline's movie selection was outdated, filled with films that had been in theaters 6 months ago. What was the point of watching something everyone had already forgotten about? I scrolled furiously, trying to find anything remotely current, but the best they had to offer was Knives Out, which, sure, great movie, but didn't everyone and their grandmother already know how it ended? And the TV shows? I was subjected to a parade of once popular sitcoms that had been wrung out of the public consciousness, recycled endlessly on streaming platforms until even their laugh tracks had grown tired. My mood darkened further. The screen flickered. The Wi-Fi icon at the corner of my seat display flashed a mocking red symbol. I could feel the walls of the plane closing in. I made one final attempt to reconnect. I toggled back to my phone, opened the Wi-Fi settings with trembling fingers, and, hallelujah, a single bar of connectivity. The wheel stopped spinning. A new message appeared on Slack. Could it be? Was my suffering finally over? Could I once again ascend to my rightful place in the digital pantheon? I clicked the message. Nothing. The plane hit turbulence again. My screen went dark. Chapter 4. Descent into Madness. As the plane shuddered once more, my screen flickering between life and digital oblivion, I felt something inside me crack. A splintering of resolve. A shattering of my previously held belief that I was a reasonable, level-headed individual. Gone was the person who entered the plane, basking in the glory of modernity. In its place was a feral creature, clutching an outdated iPhone like it was a life raft, my sanity tethered to a bar of Wi-Fi, that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The airplane's mechanical drone, once a neutral background sound, now grew ominous, oppressive, like the universe itself was conspiring against me. The very air felt thicker. I could hear every click of a seatbelt buckle, every murmur from the passengers, every rustling of a snack bag. All of it grated against my senses, mocking me with their simplicity. These people were happy in their analog existence, content to flip through a paperback novel, sip a cocktail, and stare at the map of our flight path as if it were entertainment. But not me. No. I had been cursed with awareness, with a need for speed, and I would not be undone by this digital desert without a fight. I opened my phone again, frantic now, as if by sheer willpower I could force the Wi-Fi gods to acknowledge me. I toggled between apps, Slack, Instagram, my email inbox, hoping that one of them, any of them, would load. The seconds dragged on, each as interminable as the last. Nothing. Nothing but spinning wheels and error messages. My head swam. Was it hot in here? Were we losing altitude? Surely this must be some kind of atmospheric interference, because why else would the technology of the future fail so spectacularly? My desperation grew. I leaned forward, eyeing the small crack between the window and the edge of the seat in front of me. I could see clouds taunting me with their leisurely pace, drifting along without a care. I envied those clouds, floating freely in the upper troposphere without the slightest need for connectivity. In my mind, I could hear the gentle ping of Slack notifications, just out of reach, like sirens calling me from the rocks. Ding. Another deadline missed. Ding. A colleague asking for a quick update. Ding. Someone in the group chat, reacting with a flame emoji to a meme I hadn't even seen yet. I imagined my inbox filling up, swelling like a dam about to burst, and all of it happening without me, the rightful emperor of my own digital realm. The plane hit another small patch of turbulence, and I gripped the armrest. Was this turbulence? Or was it merely the manifestation of my own unease, my body's way of translating my mental breakdown into physical reality? Was the plane itself growing more erratic in response to my rapidly deteriorating mental state? Perhaps the captain could sense my frustration and was toying with me, slowing the plane down, inching us closer to the sweet spot where Wi-Fi is weakest, just to see how much I could take before I snapped. I glared at the small monitor embedded in the seatback in front of me. In-flight Wi-Fi, $14.99. The words felt like a personal affront. $14.99 for this? For the privilege of being tortured by the ever-dangling carrot of digital connectivity? I had been a fool to trust these marketing ploys, these so-called fast internet speeds. What was I even paying for? To be strung along by a feeble connection that barely functioned? To suffer the indignity of watching pixelated videos and half-loaded social media feeds? I ripped the airplane headphones from my ears in a fit of irrational anger. Was it the headphones' fault? No, of course not. But at this point, I needed a target for my rage. The headphones, with their flimsy plastic and single-use durability, were the nearest scapegoat. I tossed them onto the tray table with the kind of theatrical flourish normally reserved for Shakespearean actors in the throes of betrayal. To my right, the woman in 11C stirred from her slumber, blinking blearily at me as if to say, "What's your problem?" But I couldn't explain it to her. How could I convey the sheer magnitude of what I was going through? To her, this was a relaxing transatlantic flight, a chance to catch up on sleep and arrive refreshed at her destination. She probably hadn't even bothered to check the Wi-Fi. Maybe she was one of those people who actually enjoyed being offline, relishing in the digital detox as if it were some form of enlightenment. The nerve. Meanwhile, I was a man on the edge, crumbling under the weight of unrealized expectations and technological failure. The disparity between us was too great. I could never explain my suffering to someone who willingly chose to remain disconnected. It would be like explaining color to a person who had only ever seen in grayscale. She gave me a sleepy half-smile, probably mistaking my agitated demeanor for some kind of nervousness about flying. She had no idea. No idea of the depth of my existential crisis, the dark and winding corridors my mind had begun to traverse. I turned my attention back to the screen. There, frozen in time, was the last thing I had managed to load before the Wi-Fi betrayed me, an article on the rise of minimalist Scandinavian home decor trends. It wasn't even a good article, just one of those fluff pieces designed to fill space between actual content. And yet, I found myself scrolling it mindlessly, over and over, the pictures of perfectly arranged neutral-tone living rooms becoming increasingly absurd to me. Why did these people need so many throw pillows? Who actually lived in these pristine, monochrome homes? It was all a conspiracy, wasn't it? A way to sell us more things we didn't need, while tricking us into thinking we were simplifying our lives. The irony was too much. Here I was, a victim of my own digital addiction, trapped in a flying metal tube, frantically searching for Wi-Fi while reading an article about the virtues of simplicity. A simpler time, where people didn't rely on in-flight internet to maintain their sanity. The hypocrisy of it all stung like a fresh slap to the face. The article's advice, declutter your space, declutter your mind, seemed like a sick joke at this point. If anything, I needed more clutter, more noise, more digital distractions to keep me from completely losing it. I stared blankly at the words on the screen, my mind spiraling deeper into a vortex of frustration and despair. Was this how it all ended? Not with a grand revelation, but with a buffering symbol, spinning endlessly in the corner of my screen, taunting me with its unfulfilled promise of connectivity? Was I doomed to spend the next 5 hours in this purgatory, cut off from the world, my social media notifications piling up like unanswered voicemails from the digital underworld? I could see it now, my life post-flight, ruined by this one tragic experience. I'd step off the plane, disoriented and disconnected, fumbling to catch up on messages and emails, like a man re-entering society after years in isolation. People would talk about things I hadn't seen, share memes I hadn't laughed at, discuss breaking news I hadn't had the chance to form an opinion on. I would be out of sync, behind the curve, a relic from the pre-landing era. My entire social standing would be shattered, my once pristine digital presence reduced to rubble. No, I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't go down without a fight. I leaned forward again, fingers trembling as I attempted to restart the in-flight Wi-Fi system. My vision tunneled. The seatbelt sign dinged on. The plane was preparing to descend, but in my mind, I was still hurtling upwards, deeper into madness. I tapped furiously as if the sheer velocity of my actions would force the universe to respond. Spinning, spinning, spinning. The wheel kept mocking me. And then, just as I felt I was about to slip into full-blown hysteria, a faint signal. It was back. Chapter 5. Philosophical Reflection. As the faint signal flickered on my screen, an unexpected stillness crept over me. For a brief moment, the spinning wheel halted, and my screen gave a tentative shudder, as if it too had reached its limit. And there it was, a single email, lonely and pixelated, but a sign of life nonetheless. The message from my boss was predictably underwhelming. Just checking in, no rush. No rush. 2 words that should have brought me relief. And yet, at this altitude, after what I'd been through, it only deepened my sense of existential despair. I had become a slave to this endless loop of connection and disconnection, chasing fleeting signals like a madman in search of the Holy Grail. But for what? To read an email that could have waited? To be reminded that, at the end of it all, no one was waiting for my urgent reply with bated breath? Was this the pinnacle of modern existence? Hurtling through the sky, obsessing over Wi-Fi that I didn't really need, only to receive validation that was utterly meaningless? I reclined back, suddenly overcome by a strange, weary clarity. Here I was, flying at 42,000 feet above the earth, nestled safely in a mechanical marvel that had more technology in its autopilot system than the Apollo missions to the moon. I was a speck in the sky, a tiny human being in the vast, unfeeling expanse of the troposphere. Yet I had somehow convinced myself that accessing Instagram DMs and responding to Slack threads was an essential task worthy of my complete mental breakdown. Had I always been this way? Or had modernity slowly, imperceptibly warped my priorities to the point where buffering was my greatest enemy? The reflection came slowly at first, then all at once. I was no different than the passengers beside me, no better, no worse. The woman in 11C, sleeping peacefully, was wise beyond her years. She had transcended the need for constant digital validation. Perhaps she had learned long ago that nothing good comes from trying to wrangle Wi-Fi at 42,000 feet. I looked around at the other passengers again with new eyes. The old man quietly reading his paperback? A scholar? The woman watching an in-flight movie from 2015? A sage. Even the child with the iPad, though he was undoubtedly doing something ridiculous like playing Minecraft in airplane mode, was enlightened by his ability to create his own digital world without the need for constant connection. And yet, there I was, still clutching my phone, my mind clouded by the demands of a digital age. I had become a caricature of myself, a man in the thrall of 21st century conveniences that, in the grand scheme of things, meant very little. I was at 42,000 feet, closer to the heavens than any of my ancestors, and yet I was worried about a network that, let's be honest, had no obligation to be functioning up here in the first place. The absurdity of it hit me like a gut punch. We, as a species, had created the ability to fly at the speed of sound, break the barriers of distance, and yet we were never satisfied. We could always find something to complain about. A slow network, a lukewarm coffee, a seat that reclined too far or not enough. How had we become so ungrateful? Wasn't it miraculous that we could even attempt to connect to the internet while moving across continents at 600 miles per hour? Did anyone in the early days of air travel sit in their little propeller planes, marveling at their ability to cross vast oceans, only to complain that they couldn't send a fax? Probably not. Those were simpler times, where the wonder of flight alone was enough. I took a deep breath, slowly closing my phone, folding it like a prayer book. Maybe it was time to find peace in the simpler things. Maybe the secret to modern happiness was accepting that not everything needed to be instant, that not every message required a prompt reply, and that not every social media feed had to be checked from the sky. After all, once we landed, the internet would be waiting for me. It always was. It always would be. Chapter 6. Epiphany, or is it? With the plane now beginning its gradual descent, the clouds parted below, revealing the distant specks of cities, towns, and rivers, weaving together a landscape of life that had been largely invisible for the last few hours. I watched the scenery unfold, wondering if maybe this was what I had been missing, the quiet beauty of simply being present, in the moment, instead of constantly trying to escape into the digital ether. I felt a sense of calm begin to take over. Maybe this was the answer: to let go, to embrace the limitations, to accept the gift of disconnection as a rare opportunity for peace. Yes, I thought. Maybe this was my true epiphany. The slow Wi-Fi wasn't a curse. It was a blessing in disguise. It was the universe's way of telling me to stop, to breathe, to recognize the majesty of flying across the world without needing to prove my existence with every passing notification. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes, imagining what life could be like if I maintained this newfound sense of perspective. I could walk off the plane with a clear head, spend my next few hours reading an actual book, maybe even meditating on the meaning of it all. I could reclaim the lost art of patience, rediscover the simple joy of being unreachable for a few hours. But just as I was about to fully embrace this inner tranquility, I felt a vibration in my pocket. My phone lit up. The screen, once so unreliable, now gleamed with a new message. And not just any message, an Instagram notification. I hesitated. Surely I had just promised myself that I would transcend this need for digital connection. But then again, what harm could one little peek do? After all, if someone had tagged me in something, maybe it was important. Maybe I needed to see it, if only for a moment. Just to stay in the loop. Before I knew it, I had unlocked my phone. There it was. A new post, a new comment, a new thread that demanded my attention. And just like that, I was pulled back into the endless whirlpool of notifications, messages, and the dopamine-driven rush of modern life. As the plane landed with a gentle bump and the wheels screeched against the tarmac, I laughed quietly to myself. So much for enlightenment. I guess there are some things you can't escape, even at 42,000 feet. With the plane now taxiing to the gate, the seatbelt signs flickered off, and passengers began to stand, collecting their bags, stretching their legs, and checking their phones. I joined them, the spell of philosophical reflection broken by the ding of a fully connected phone. My Wi-Fi, at last, was working perfectly. As I stepped off the plane, back into the world of endless Wi-Fi, I couldn't help but wonder, was it really so bad to crave connection even if it drove me mad? Or had I, in some strange, absurd way, found my place in the chaotic, wonderful, tech-dependent world? Either way, one thing was certain. I needed to reply to my emails. Written by Dan Van Moll, narrated by Costner. For more rants, subscribe on crankydan.com. It's cranky, but it's free too.